It's lovely to see you all here today. Those of you who don't know me, I'm Angharad. I am regional champion for the Great Science Chef schools in the Yorkshire region. I'm a primary school teacher. I work part-time in a school in Northwest Leeds, and then I also work as a consultant in the rest of my, what I'd say is spare time, but isn't really. So today's session, we're going to be looking at asking and investigating scientific questions outdoors. And I always love a bit of a pun, so I was trying to come up with a scientific question for the title. So I borrowed two bees or not two bees as our title for today. So I hope you're not offended by my pun. So today's session, we're going to hopefully identify some of the characteristics of effective outdoor learning. We're going to consider how to manage outdoor science learning, thinking about it from kind of a safety and behaviour point of view. We're going to look at some strategies, some resources that will encourage children to ask scientific questions outdoors and to investigate them. And we'll be looking at exploring how children can use the outdoors to share and communicate with new audiences as well, because obviously that's a big part of the Great Science Share for schools, is that communication. So to get you started, I've got a lovely Explorify for you. So I'd like you to have a little guess in the chat what you think this might be. It's a zoom in, zoom out. So we're at full magnification at the moment. So pop in what you think it could be. We'll see if anyone is good. Either they've seen this one before or they're very good at guessing. So we've got tortoise shell, we've got a few guesses of wasp nest, surface of an egg, golf ball, polystyrene, ice cream or foam on the sea, lovely. Could be a rock. Some very interesting guesses. Ice as well, possibly. Right, let's zoom out slightly, see if your idea changes. What about now? Any changes in what you're thinking? Anyone want to change their idea, add to it? I'm guessing a few of you might have seen this one before. I love a bit of Explorify, it's great fun. Such a lovely starter and a great discussion. So we're erring towards bees or wasps in terms of a beehive or wasp nest. So you're going in that direction now. Let's zoom out a little bit more. There we go. And we'll do one final zoom out. Excellent. Well done to those of you who guessed. Fantastic. I love this one. I think it's brilliant. It's a lovely starter. I'm sure all of you are keen Explorifiers. I know we've got some Explorify champions with us today as well. But it's a lovely starter, and there's some brilliant Explorify activities that are great starters or great hooks for outdoor learning. So have a good search on the Explorify website and see what you can find there. They're excellent ones. Now you're all warmed up, let's get cracking. So we're first going to start having a think about the characteristics of effective outdoor learning. And Lee Hoth, she wrote a paper as part of her doctorate about the 5 distinctive characteristics which make outdoor learning really successful and effective. And these were defined as a setting that supports children in making the transitions from within the classroom to beyond it, and that's vital. That it's regular and it's frequent. So it's not something that you go out and do once in a blue moon, or you have just 1 week of outdoor learning a year, or you just have a focus for half a term and then you leave it. It's important that it happens regularly and it happens really frequently as well. A setting that addresses the basic psychological and physiological needs of the children is really vital. They can't learn, they can't access that kind of higher level of learning if they're not feeling safe, if they're not feeling secure. And so addressing that in the first instance, really important. Thinking about then number 4, transition back into the classroom. I think a lot of the time we might consider the going out as the important bit, but actually the coming back into the classroom, that transition back in is just as important. And then characteristic number 5 is the shift to weaker framing. And what we're thinking about with weaker framing, if we're talking about framing, we're thinking about how adults and children interact. And in a classroom environment, you tend to have quite a strong framing where there's a set framework for the interactions. It tends to be teacher asks the question, child answers the question. Now, obviously, that's a little bit simplistic. It's not quite as simple as that. But when we're moving to an outdoor environment, we want the framing to be weaker. We want there to be a bit more freedom, a bit more flexibility in the way people interact, the children taking a bit more charge. Thinking about those off-task kind of discussions and how important those really are, and how the dynamics of those conversations are quite different outside the classroom. You've got children asking more questions, being more interactive, leading their learning more, and that's really important to have that weaker framing when you're outside. And that's one of the really important things about having effective outdoor learning, that there is that ownership of the children. And that works really nicely in terms of the Great Science Share for schools, because we want the children to be asking their own questions. We want them to be leading their learning. So it works and fits beautifully there. So today we're going to be focusing on sort of 3 of those areas and drawing them together. We're going to be thinking about transitions, so having some ideas, some strategies for moving in and out of the classroom. We're going to be thinking about addressing the needs of the children, having some top tips for managing outdoor learning, kind of from a behaviour side of things, but making sure the children are feeling really comfortable and you as the teacher are feeling comfortable as well. And thinking about weaker framing and having some strategies and resources that help the children to develop questions and for you to support them with that. So initially we're going to start thinking about strategies for transitions. I think quite often we do think about it in terms of if we're going on a longer journey, if we're going on a visit somewhere, but when it's just kind of going into the school grounds, often I think that gets forgotten a little bit. But there are some really lovely strategies out there that help support that, get the children engaged really quickly, get them focused on their learning, and it helps that movement from inside the classroom to outside the classroom being much smoother. Now, one of my favourites, I have to say, is a journey stick. I absolutely love this. My favourite is doing it really kind of rustically and having a proper stick, getting some string. And as you move through the journey to the place you've identified as where you're going to be doing your outdoor learning, that might be kind of a field or it might be part of your school grounds. As you move along that journey, you're picking up objects or finding really interesting things and you're tying them onto this stick. I really like it because it reminds me of kind of like a dream catcher. You're adding things onto the stick. Now with some children, depending on what year group you work with and how much time you've got allocated for the particular lesson you're doing, having a stick and having string and kind of tying it on can be a little bit challenging. Maybe they're going to struggle with tying knots, or maybe you just don't have the time for them to kind of add the bits on as they go. So a really nice alternative is just have a little strip of cardboard and some sticky back tape, like double-sided or wrapped around. And it's another way of just adding onto the journey stick what the children have found on their way out to where you're going for your outdoor learning and on the way back as well. And it tells that story and it allows them to remember and recount what they've learned and what they've seen as part of that lesson. It's a great start, really lovely. We took some children to Harlow Car Gardens, which is in Harrogate, a couple of years ago to a reception, and they had a little journey stick, which was just card with a little bit of sellotape, and they loved it. And they took them back to school and they were using them as bookmarks. And it was just so nice to see the children interacting and talking about what they'd been doing and what they'd learnt, using that as a point of reference. Another fabulous thing to do on a transition in and out of the classroom to your outdoor learning is having a viewing frame. Now, it doesn't have to be as posh as this wooden one. It can be really simple and just a cardboard frame. Alternatively, you could use something like a kitchen roll tube, chop them down, or something like coloured acetate, something that gets the children to focus on the world around them in a different way and to frame what they can see. So they're focusing in on specific things. Quality street wrappers works really nicely. The different coloured ones take the foil off and you're looking through a really colourful lens and seeing the world in a really different way. And this is successful on your way out, but also on your way back. back into the classroom. It gives that little bit of focus. Now this is completely up my street because I am a big fan of maps, but I also love the idea of tracking as well. So if you have a map of the area you're going to, a map of your school grounds, you could set up a little trail along the map, or you could do it using sticks and stones, following kind of tracking signs. This one's from the Scouts, and you can get a little kind of PDF you download so the children know what all the different signs are, and they can follow in small groups and lead their way to the place that you've designated for the outdoor learning for the day. It's brilliant fun. We did it as part of a Stone Age topic, so that children went out and they created the signs on the way, and then other members of the class followed them out and followed to the place on the banks where we were going to do our lesson for the day. So two really nice ways of getting the children focused and engaged. It's not necessarily directly linked to the learning that you're doing that day, although it can be, but it's great, and it directs them to the place you want them to go, and gets them really excited at the start of the lesson. Now linked to this, the next activity seems to be more of a static activity. I'm going to show you a little clip, and then I'll explain how I've used it as a transition activity afterwards. Hopefully, there we go.
Sitting quietly, listening to the soothing voices of nearby trees, birds, and rustling grasses, calms us and deepens our appreciation for the life around us. Sound map is an excellent activity for instilling greater awareness of one's surroundings. To play, give each person a piece of paper with an X marked in the center. Tell the participants that the paper is a sound map and that the X represents where each player is sitting. When a player hears a sound, he makes the mark on the paper to represent the sound. The location of the mark should indicate the direction and distance of the sound from the player's seat. Tell players not to draw a detailed picture for each sound, but to make just a simple mark. For example, a few wavy lines could represent a gust of wind, or a musical note could indicate a bird song. Making simple marks keeps the focus on listening rather than on drawing.
Now, as a static activity, it's a really lovely one once you're out and you're doing your learning. But this also works really nicely as a transition activity. If you give the children, again, a map of the area they're in, and as they walk to the place you're going, they can follow where they're walking on the map, and they can try and mark the different sounds as they move about. So if they can hear a bird across the playground, then over by the playground where they think it is, they can mark a little symbol on the map. And again, it's a really nice way of getting them focused. It's getting them aware of the environment and the nature around them. And it also gets them walking quietly around the school if that's where you're at, which is always an added bonus as well. Another thing is thinking about a hook or a starter. Now, I know when we're in the classroom as teachers, we're great at having that activity that just gets them engaged. It could be a letter from the Prime Minister, or it could be a box of treasure. But I think sometimes when we're doing outdoor learning, we forget that a hook is a really lovely way to start the lesson. So having something at the start, maybe some bones have been found outside, or maybe there is a letter, but it's a letter about the school grounds or the nearby park. Having that hook is a really lovely way to start your outdoor learning lesson. And it can be a really nice transition if there's something to do as soon as you get outside the classroom door. Now, there are some really lovely lessons and starters on Outdoor Learning Made Easy. It's a website that I discovered a little while ago, and a lot of the activities are downloadable and free as well. There's lots of lovely ones to get you started, hooks and starter activities. This one's all to do with dinosaur bones, but there are lots of others of a range of different types. Some of them are scientific, others are not, but are really great starters and for a range of ages as well. One of them from the same website that I love is this one, Hanging Facts or Hanging Questions. It can be used as a little bit of a treasure hunt, that you could have these around the school grounds or around the park if you've been able to get out sooner, and they could be pointing the direction to the next part of the learning. So they could be facts that the children have to gather as they go round, or it could be questions that are getting them thinking about the particular scientific topic or a particular part of the school ground you're going to. So it could direct them if you're wanting them to find an evergreen tree. You might be aware there's one in the particular location you're wanting them to aim for, and so you're pointing them in the direction of where you want to go. And obviously, thinking about the Great Science Share, we're wanting the children to be coming up with their own questions. So starting them to be thinking about questions they could ask about their environment is a really great starter. So there are lots of ideas and ways we can get them in and out of the classroom. I'm sure there are lots of others that you've used really successfully or that you've heard about. Those were just a few ones that I've used personally and I love, and I think they're great ways of going in and out of the classroom. So the next thing we're going to think about is when we're outside, how are we managing the outdoor learning? And there's a lovely information pack of outdoor learning from the Woodland Trust. And there's some brilliant top tips in there for ensuring that behaviour is managed really well and ensuring the teacher has a really good grasp on what they're doing. And I thought I'd share with you some of those today. These are stolen from the Woodland Trust outdoor learning pack, and I'd highly recommend you getting hold of that if you haven't seen it. As part of the resources that you'll get emailed after today's session, I've put together a list of all the websites or the resources that I've mentioned. So all of these will have a link for you to be able to get hold of them and download them for yourself. But some of the top tips that the Woodland Trust suggest in terms of managing that outdoor learning and the behaviour, one of them is setting expectations. So I think within our classroom environment, children, once they've been in our classes a while, they really get the hang of what the expectations are. There are school rules, there are behaviour policies, there are ways that we all manage our own classrooms. And I think ensuring that they've got the same understanding of what you expect from them outside the classroom allows them to have those boundaries, they can then relax, and they can be thinking about how they can look after themselves as part of that, and also look after their environment as well, whether that be the school grounds that you're in or whether that be another outdoor environment. Now, thinking about meeting children's needs, we need to ensure that they do feel safe. Now, part of that will be that boundaries and expectations, but it's also things like making sure there are enough adults and that children know which adults are coming out with them, making sure they've done things like go to the toilet beforehand. If they're not feeling comfortable in themselves, whether that's a psychological feeling or whether that's a physiological feeling, then they're not going to be able to access the learning that you've planned for them in as deep a way or in a successful a way. So ensuring that all their needs are met beforehand are really, really important. And then you've got your physical boundaries. Again, inside you've got the classroom walls, you've got the school, they know where their boundaries are. So it's really important that you as a member of staff, you as a teacher, know your route, where you're going, ensuring the children are aware and knowing what boundaries you're going to give them when you get to the area you're using. These could be physical markers, or it could be markers that you point out to the children so they know how far they can go, and so they know when you want them back and what signal you're going to give as well. You've also got to ensure that all the staff with you are consistent and fair, just like you would be in school. So having ways that you've discussed as a team of how you're going to respond to different behaviours to make sure it's all consistent is really important. And particularly if you're going on a visit further afield and you've got helpers or adults in with you who you might not normally work with as closely, just making sure they are aware of how you're going to manage the behaviour and making sure it's consistent. Now, some children might find this really tricky. They might find it quite dangerous going outside. Their perception of it, depending on where you are, could be scary. They could find it really tricky. So making sure that you're dealing with any fears, any perceptions of it being quite dangerous outside is really important, and thinking about it in a very non-judgmental way. And making as much of it as predictable as possible is great, so that you know where things like the toilets are, so you know, and the children know how long the visit's going to be, how long you're going to be outside for. Things like that. As many things as you can make predictable as possible is really important. But I think don't be afraid to be child or nature-led as well. It's great to have that kind of flexibility. You want to be able to keep it simple, not to talk for too long. Outdoors, particularly, children find it really tricky to listen for a long period of time. So have a really clear plan and a really short and simple way of introducing what you want them to do. And maybe having a focal point, so something that you're showing them or somewhere you're going to stand near, and a demonstration if you can, and that'll get them really focused, and it will keep that introduction simple and hold their focus for a short period of time. And then thinking about kind of wrapping up the session, if you can possibly evaluate what you've learned outside while you're still in that outdoor environment, you'll get much more from the children than if you say, okay, we're going to head back into the classroom now. And I know it's a really easy thing to do. We'll talk about it when we get back, everyone. There are so many lovely ways of thinking about how you can assess what the children have learned while they're still outside, that if you can do that wherever possible, you'll get much more out of their learning, and they will too. So spend as much time outside and try and have the full length of the lesson, and not do a kind of, we'll catch up back in the classroom, is another really top tip for you there. So moving on to strategies and resources for developing questions. There are so many brilliant things out there, so many things that the great science chef schools have developed, but also some other brilliant resources that are there for you to use. Lots of them are free. So starting with some of the great science share for schools resources. I know on Kate's session, thinking about books last week, she talked about using the question frame to frame parts of the text. But the question frame is also one of my favourite question makers that the Great Science Share for Schools developed last year as part of their resources. And it's a lovely way of thinking about how we can come up with questions about things that we can see. And it's a great way of just kind of framing what you can see outside, because you can easily take a question frame with you. You could use it as that transition frame to be looking at as you move outside. And once you're in the area and doing the learning, you can get the children to place it on things they find really interesting. Stick post-it notes around the outside if you want. And it's a perfect way of getting them to come up with their own questions. So the question frame is a lovely one for outdoor learning. Another of the question makers, which is a really good one to adapt for outdoor learning, is the question spinner. Now, I've done this by cutting it up into pieces, and either me selecting the question starters or the children picking the question starters they wanted to focus on, laying them out outside, almost a little bit like kind of spin the bottle-esque type thing, but using a natural resource as the spinner in the middle. So maybe dropping a leaf down into the middle of the different question starters, or having a sycamore seed and spinning it into the middle, or even something simple as spinning a twig and seeing which of the question starters it lands nearest. There's lots of different ways you can do it. And I'd suggest doing it as a teacher-led thing first, selecting some of those question starters that you think are going to be really important or really useful in terms of developing the children's questioning. But when the children get more confident, they might want to select some of those question starters and pick which ones they're going to use for that particular lesson. So it's just a different way of using the question spinner. You could take out the traditional question spinner with you, and you could take out any of the other question makers, but these are two that I find really work well with the outdoor environment and doing learning outside. Now, I have to say I've stolen this slide with permission from Claire Seeley. I was on a webinar with Claire, and she was presenting about teachers questioning, supporting children's thinking. And she talked about blanks questioning. And I asked her if I could steal the slide, because it thinks about this particular way, thinks about how the adult is talking to the children. But it's also really important thinking about those different levels of questioning when the children are coming up with their own questions. So Blank, Rose and Berlin devised a language analysis, and it was based on 4 different levels. And level 1 was kind of matching perception. So it was short questions and responding to key information. So really quite basic. So who is that? What is that? Find me something. Level 2 is a bit more of a selective analysis of perception. So the children have to focus a little bit more and select the bits that are important. So for example, what's happening? Where is something? And then when you move to level 3 questioning, the children have to consider a range of different facts and they have to analyse them a little bit more. So it's a bit more of that deeper thinking. And when you get to the level 4 questions, there's a lot more reasoning in there. Quite often it's more abstract thinking. And this is really important in how you approach your questioning, but it's also great to think about this from a point of view of developing the children's questions and the things that they are coming up with. So you could think about, once the children have come up with some questions, maybe you've used one of the question generators or question makers to help them, can they then sort the questions they've come up with? And you could do something like having a table, creating a table outside. Another way I've done it is by hanging a washing line or something on some trees and having the question starters pinned to the washing line. And then as the children come up with the questions, they sort them by attaching them to the washing line underneath the correct question starter. And it just allows the children to start thinking about what different types of questions they're asking and maybe which ones are going to be more important or allow us to develop more information by investigating these questions. Now, another way of thinking about sorting the questions once you've started developing that questioning is by using question sieving. And Terrific Scientific from the BBC has got some information about question sieving. They've got lots of kind of modules and different focuses, and one of their focuses is questioning. So there's a booklet with lots of lovely ideas for developing children's questioning. And one of the things it gets the children to do once they've generated their questions is to start thinking about sorting them, sifting through them, and sieving them to see which ones you can investigate, which ones you can gather evidence for, which ones are more complex questions that you can't do in a primary classroom. And they use a question sieve to allow children to do this. And it's essentially a sequence of questions that allows you to kind of sieve out the ones that are going to be really successful for your learning and ones that might be a little bit more challenging. Now, this is obviously something that can be done inside the classroom, but also outside the classroom as well. When you're outside, it's just a case of thinking about how you're going to get the children to move through this process. So you're thinking about what your question is. Are you going to be able to collect evidence? What type of inquiry does your question lead to? And I think when we're thinking about primary science, inquiry types are a really big focus. So that's an important thing for the children to start to be able to determine. Are you going to be able to answer your question on your own? Are you going to need adult support? What sort of equipment are you going to need? Are you going to be able to answer the question within the bounds of the school environment, within the resources that you've got? And how can you improve your question? And I think as you get into Key Stage 2, these are the sorts of things that children need to start developing so that they are aware of which questions that they've come up with are going to be really successful and are going to lead to some sort of inquiry or some sort of investigation. Which ones maybe can be put to one side and you can find out the answers to, you can research and use secondary sources, and which ones are really not going to be very successful and we just can't do that in this particular environment. So there's lots of things to be thinking about in terms of what makes a good scientific question. And I think one of the things that children often come up with is they think about what's best. So they ask, what's the best tree? What's the best rock? What's the best seed? So having that more specific criteria and understanding that best isn't a very scientific way of asking a question is really important. And the example that's in the Terrific Scientific here is, which is the best compost for growing tomatoes in? And that's the sort of question you can imagine a child asking. But we need to know what the criteria for best is. So kind of digging down metaphorically as well as literally, and thinking about what actual criteria we're going for. What does best mean? Is it going to have the tallest plant? Is it going to have the juiciest tomatoes? Is it going to have the most tomatoes produced? And just kind of clarifying that a little bit more is going to be really helpful and really successful in terms of allowing the children to develop really effective questioning. Other things to look out for, you may have come across the Q-Smart project that Lynn Bianchi and the team at SERI are working on. It's a project aiming to develop understanding about the nature of children's scientific questions. And it's an ongoing project at the moment. There may be some of you who are involved with that, but keep an eye on things. I think the information and the results that are going to come out of it are going to be really fascinating. So now that we've thought about how we're going to transition in and out of the classroom, now that we've thought about how we can develop questioning within the children's, making sure that they feel confident questioning, making sure that the questions they're generating are becoming more scientific. I wanted just to suggest a few ideas for things that you could focus on. Now, the Great Science Share for Schools this year, the overarching theme is climate change. But it doesn't have to be focused on that if you're thinking about questions for that. It could be based on something else. And there's lots of lovely resources out there that could help you direct children or focus children on questions and coming up with ways to answer those. Now, I'm not going to talk much about books today. Kate did that last week, but this, I have to say, is one of my favourite resources. I love the Lost Words book. There's lots of resources that come with it that you can download, but it's a brilliant way of getting children to think about nature and their outside environment. I wouldn't say it gives you very direct scientific focuses, but it starts the children imagining and getting engaged with nature, and it's lovely. And if you haven't seen it or read it, then I'd highly recommend it. We looked at the Lost Words as part of our home learning last year during lockdown. We did it as a whole school project, and each key stage focused on different poems within the Lost Words book. And the children then had the remit to create investigations and inquiry and resources based on some of the things they saw in the book and in the poems. So we've got a couple of seed spinners going on here, a couple of investigations, and a child who also created a garden glossary based on some of the words in the Lost Words. So really lovely things that were just inspired by this book. So yeah, it's a wonderful one to use when you're starting to think about going outdoors and inspiring children, particularly if you're thinking about cross-curricular learning as well. There's so much you can do with this book. Another great thing tends to be for Key Stage 2, probably Year 5 and 6 mainly. You could do some air pollution research, and the Primary Science Teaching Trust, they have some brilliant resources that allow you to develop that. So the links will be on the resource sheet, but they have some information, they've got lots of data, they've got lots of ways that you can use the UK Air Data Archives for your area or for different areas, and do some research yourselves. As I say, probably better for upper Key Stage 2, so years 5 and 6, but a brilliant resource there. We've also got the Big Schools Birdwatch. Now this happens every year and the resources are super, and it happened again this year. There were two elements to it this year, knowing that some children were at home and some children were at school, so they put together resources that catered for both. So there's a live lesson which is still able to watch, and there are also some brilliant sheets for looking at which birds you can see. And I really like the fact that they've thought about the mathematical understanding for the younger children, because they've developed worksheets where they've got tens frames, and they've developed worksheets where there's focus on number and understanding the concept of number and counting. So it's been really carefully thought out. There's lots of great resources on there, not just for this year's, but previous years. So I'd recommend going and having a little look. It's something that can be done in most locations. I don't think there's really a limit on where you can not do the bird watch. And even if the official data has already been submitted, there's brilliant things that you can do in your school grounds. Another great resource, I mentioned Terrific Scientific in terms of the questions before on questioning, but there's some great resources linked to outdoor learning. There's a whole booklet, a teacher resource all about trees, which is obviously great, and lots of data and collecting data linked to carbon as well. So I'd highly recommend having a look on the Terrific Scientific website. Then we've got the Crest Awards. The Crest Awards are linked partners with the Great Science Share this year. And within their booklets of the different Superstar and Star Awards, there's some brilliant outdoor learning activities. This one's all to do with bumblebees. And there's all the resources that you need to be able to do it, kind of the things that you need and what to do, and really simply to be able to do as part of a lesson. So you don't have to do it as part of your Crest Awards, but you can do. Again, some great outdoor learning. Again, back to the Primary Science Teaching Trust. They looked at, in a project a few years ago, Bright Ideas Time, and one of the things they focused on was big questions. And if you download some of the resources, there are some really good outdoor learning big questions that get children starting to think about the environment outside and starting to think about the sorts of questions they might want to ask. So looking at trees, but also looking at things like puddles and where do puddles go. And there's some really nice ones that you could probably tie into the curriculum as well if you've got a particular curriculum focus that you want to look at. And again, Primary Science Teaching Trust, they're focusing, they're on a lot of my resources today. There's, as part of the TAPS project, there's a whole list of primary science inquiry that can be done outdoors, and there's this document that you can download which has lots of brilliant investigations and things that would start children thinking about their own questions and their own investigations. So all the links, as I say, are on the resource sheet that you'll get sent out to you, so this will be downloadable from there. But brilliant investigations you can do, and for all year groups from reception all the way up. Other places to go for more ideas for outdoor learning. Outdoor Classroom Day, there's a brilliant website. It is on a particular day, but the resources are available all year round. And there's also a webinar that you can watch about outdoor learning as well, which is really useful. Learning Through Landscapes is a charity, and it's got lots of resources on their website, as has Countryside Classroom. And those of you who use Plan Assessment, they've created an outdoor learning CPD that you can download for free, which if you're trying to introduce your staff or support your staff in terms of going outdoors more to do science, this is a really great way of getting them to do that. And you can download the PowerPoint and kind of the notes for the session, and you can run that in your schools. So lots of things out there, are so many, it was hard to narrow them down for today's session. So now I've got a challenge for you. In a moment, we are going to pop you into breakout rooms. And once you go into your breakout room, I want you to go on a bit of a scavenger hunt. You're going to have a couple of minutes, if you are able to pop outside really quickly and either find an interesting object and bring it back with you, or take a photo of an interesting object and bring it back with you to share with your breakout room. Once you're back in your breakout room and you've got a selection of objects between you, I want you to share the objects with your group. So why did you choose it? Okay, maybe it was the first thing you found when you stepped outside the door, that's possible. Or was it something that was really interesting that you caught your eye? Was it something that stood out for you? If possible, try and add the photos of the objects to the Padlet. I put the QR code in the bottom right-hand corner here. I'll also put the link in the chat in a moment. So pop the photos under the column that's for your breakout room group, so you'll all know which breakout room you're in. So for example, you're in group 3 breakout room, add your photos to that column, and then as a group, try and come up with some questions that either you or the children that might ask about that object. It could be things that they just kind of come up with, or it could be things linked to an investigation that you could do. And what I want you to do in your breakout rooms is to support each other to try and make those questions more scientific. So think about those initial questions that children might come up with. How can you improve them? So if it's one that's got the word best in it, how can you make it a better question? How can you ensure that it's something you could find out more about? Is it something you can investigate? So I'll just recap. You're going to be popped into your breakout rooms. Scan the QR code now before you go into those breakout rooms to make sure you're able to access the Padlet. And then you're going to run outside as quickly as you can, a bit like Taskmaster. You're going to go and find an object that's interesting from the outdoors, and you're going to either bring it back with you or take a photo of it. Once you're in your breakout rooms, share those objects, tell each other about them, and see if you can generate some really interesting questions that you might want to find out about those objects. If anyone's got any questions, let me know. Pop something in the chat or just give me a shout. But I think, Kate, if we can go into the breakout rooms, I will pop into the chat the Padlet website now. Just give me one moment in case you aren't able to access the QR code. Hopefully that link should take you through now, and it should take you through to a Padlet that's got trees on it. Right, let's go into those breakout rooms now and then off on your scavenger hunt. Just having a scan through to see what people have been taking pictures of. These look brilliant.
Nice.
Some very different things. Does a sea creature live inside? Excellent. Oh, now that's a lovely snowdrop picture in breakout room 2. I'm assuming that probably wasn't just taken now, but it's great. Fantastic. Oh, wow, you have been busy. Fantastic. I think, have we got everyone back now? Everyone joining us? Yeah, great. Well, nice to have you all back, and thanks for being so engaged with that. Some wonderful pictures that you've managed to either take yourselves or delegate to other members of the household to go and find things. Sorry if I did send you out in the middle of the rain or hailstorm. I was saying it's lovely weather here now, but if it was anything like this morning, you might have had a quick shower. So apologies for that. But some brilliant ideas here. Lovely questions that you've come up with. Some of them are quite scientific, some of them slightly less so, but I can imagine a lot of the children have been coming up with some of these questions, and then it's your job as the teacher to then scaffold and model how you can bring them into a more scientific type of question, using some of those techniques and strategies that we looked at earlier. So I'm just going to jump back to my slides now. The Padlet will be left open, so if you want to have a look later on, you'll be able to access it. And I've put the link to it in the resources, so you'll be able to get hold of it even if you close down your window today, and you'll be able to get back on it nice and easily. So hopefully we are back to the PowerPoint presentation. So I wanted to share a little bit about how we can share and communicate, and how the children can share and communicate their ideas and things they've been investigating in their questions. Because obviously a massive part of the Great Science Share for Schools is getting children to do that, to communicate. So it's them telling each other what they've been up to, what they've discovered. When pre-lockdown, which seems a very long time ago, we used to have kind of a marketplace event in school where we had tables set out around the hall. I think it's one of those quite popular events, a little bit like a science fair, and the children had the opportunity to share their learning and communicate what they'd found in that kind of way. But there are so many different ways that you can do that, and the children can. So I've just gathered a few ideas together today. Photos, images, take pictures of what you've been doing and share them, annotate them, put them into photo books with annotations. Now, a lot of the things I've got today are from entries to the Great Science Share from pupils in my school last year, and they were amazing. They did such a wonderful job. They took photos of things they've been up to. We've got a little boy here who'd been planting and looking at how high his plants grew, and the little girl in the picture had been investigating materials for birds' nests, and the photos just showed a journey of what they've been up to. Journaling seems to be a massive thing at the moment. Every time I go on Twitter, there seems to be tweets, and I've stolen a tweet from Claire today about science journaling, which is a lovely way to share what the children have been learning, and an ideal thing to be doing outside. They can take their journals out with them, and they can record their findings as they go along. They can draw pictures, they can annotate them. It's a really creative way. It's very cross-curricular, so you're getting kind of your English and your art into a science lesson, which is obviously something we're trying to make the most of the number of hours we've got in school with the children. So if you can do cross-curricular learning, all the better for it. So journaling is a really popular thing to do, and I think works really nicely, particularly if we're looking at nature and the environment around us. Sketching links really nicely in with that, taking sketchbooks out with you, making notes, taking rubbings, sketch what you can see. Again, really cross-curricular and really creative. Posters, again, probably something you wouldn't do while you were outside, but sharing the learning once you're back in class, getting the paints out, getting the kind of creative juices going, and they're a great way to display and share the learning that the children have been getting up to. Poems as well. Acrostic are really simple ones, but there's lots of different ways that you can create poems and the children can write about what they've learnt. This is something I came across fairly recently. It's creating a journey storyline. So as you've been on your learning outside, you've kind of marked points on a map, and then you create a mini version of your journey. So things you found outside, things you investigated, and you can use like little cocktail sticks with stickers on to mark important parts of your journey outside. And I thought it was a lovely way of representing the things you've learned. Almost from like an ant's eye view or a bug's eye view, just tiny little versions of your journey. And then we've got video diaries, and this was another fabulous entry last year from some of our pupils. I won't show you all of it, but I'll show you the start of Ben and Kate Find Out. I love Ben and Kate, they're absolutely adorable. And they became such engaged scientists, and they kept sending me little video diaries, video journals. And even this half term, there was a whiz pop bang challenge, like a 7-day challenge over February half term. And every day I'd get a tweet from their dad tagging me in of the things that they've been up to over February half term. It's been lovely to see how engaged they've become with science over the last year or so. And it's lovely to see a different way of presenting what they've been investigating. So thinking about why we do outdoor learning and try and sort of wrap up and summarise why it's so important. The Natural Connections project looked at data on a range of the impacts of outdoor learning, and there were so many positives that came out of it. Enjoyment of lessons was 95%, engagement and understanding of nature 94%, got social skills, overall engagement with learning, well-being, which is such an important thing at the moment, behaviour and attainment, even that was up 57%. So there's so many reasons why outdoor learning in general is great and such a vital part of our teaching at school. It helps to promote curiosity, develop inquisitive thinking and reflective thinking, experiencing science in the real world. It gives you more room to learn. Group work becomes easier because you're not all huddled around a table in the classroom. You're building resilience, adaptability, thinking about risk and hazards. And also, unfortunately, we've got to think about, in terms of COVID, there is less risk of infection as well. So many reasons you should be getting outdoors at the moment, and getting the children asking and answering their own questions. And I think we are about on time to wrap up. So I hope today we've identified some of the characteristics of effective outdoor learning. We've thought about how we can manage it, thought about strategies and resources that encourage children to ask their own questions, to investigate them. And I've shared with you some ways that children can communicate with new audiences in different ways, in creative ways. So hopefully you'll have learned some things that are new, fingers crossed, but also hopefully you'll be inspired to join the Great Science Share for Schools this year. It's child focused, it's inclusive, it's non-competitive, and it's a brilliant way of collaborating. So as I mentioned earlier, this year's theme is climate change, although you don't have to follow that theme. And there's lots of different ways you can get involved, either virtually or face-to-face. And to get involved, go onto the website, get yourself registered, start looking at the resources. The weekly themes will be coming out in the not too distant future. There are more webinars and podcasts for you to listen to as well. So get stuck in. And you may have seen the announcement recently that the Royal Society and Brian Cox are involved, which I have to say I am very excited about. So if you're not already signed up for it, please do. I would highly recommend it, as both a teacher who's done it many times, but also as a regional champion. And just enjoy. I hope you have enjoyed today's session. If you could fill in the evaluation, that'd be great. And thank you for getting so stuck in during our scavenger hunt, our taskmaster session. It's been lovely to see you all today, and thanks again for coming.
Thanks so much, Angharad. That was brilliant. Really good. Just while people are just finishing off the evaluation, I'm just going to pop in the chat a link to the rest of the webcasts, which are continuing for another few weeks. So if you want to come along for those, there's also podcasts and recordings of all of the webinars will be available sort of a week or so after. Just give us a little bit of time to edit them. And yeah, thanks everyone for coming. It's been brilliant to see you all.